porque cantando se alegra cielito, lindo los corazones. Ay, 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 canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegra cielito, lindo los corazones. I know that sounds like an odd song to start with, but the reason is that our class today is called I, and a bit of AI, which again is an odd title, but you'll understand why in just a minute. So, welcome back to everyone. I hope that you found your source sheets, and if not, we will, as usual, have them printed out. We'll have them projected on the screen. So we are going to talk this week about two battles at a place called Ai. That's the first two I's. But I also want to let you know that I used some AI in preparing for this class, as I have in a few bits and pieces for the other classes. And I have found that when used carefully and judiciously, it is amazing. Now, the way in which I use it is a lot like Google search, but on steroids. I don't use it as a substitute for reading or learning, but as an enhancement. And I will give you some examples of where I used it as we go. So, for example, when I told ChatGPT, which is my preferred AI tool, what I would be talking about today, it suggested theme: examining the Israelites' defeat at Ai as a crucial lesson in humility, obedience, and the consequences of neglecting God's guidance. Okay, so that is part of what we are going to discuss today. So let's dive in with saying the blessing together, and you can all be unmuted so we hear the rich cacophony of all of our voices together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Let's soak ourselves in the study of Torah. So first, we're going to rewind a little bit to talk about some leftovers from last week. And I am going to bring our materials up so that we can look at them. Okay, so you will see some familiar pictures here of Kathleen Kenyon and the picture that I showed last week of Tel Es-Sutan. One of the things we talked about last week, and the picture that's on the right shows you the distance between, over here is the modern day site of Jericho, and the red dot over here is Tel Es-Sutan, which is the ancient site of Jericho. And that distance is 5 minutes by car. So they are not very far apart at all. They are both in the area known as the West Bank. So I wanted to show everyone that because we had some discussion about it last week. I also wanted to show you these two maps. This is from Google Maps. It shows on the right-hand side, we can see the distance from Jericho to Jerusalem. The red dot is Jerusalem. That is about 30 minutes by car. And this map over on the left-hand side, or we're going right to left because here we are in Hebrew. This over here is the starting point for our conquest. Over here is Jericho. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked about Gilgal. And here is I, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So this gives you some idea of the areas that we're talking about. Down here's the Dead Sea. Up here is the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Over here is the Mediterranean. And these other red lines we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks about other areas that are parts of the conquest of Canaan. So I hope that that is helpful for you. And I, by the way, with spelled with an ayin, means a ruin or a heap of ruins. Aleph Yud, that's ayin with a yud. Aleph Yud, which is pronounced e because there's a hirik, a dot underneath, means island. So it's important to realize that it's very significant whether you have an ayin or an aleph as the non-pronounced letter at the beginning of a word. These letters have significance. So last week we talked about the archaeological ruins and whether there was evidence of destruction happening when the biblical narrative said it had happened. I wanted to share just one more quote or piece of commentary that we didn't get to last week that indicates that when the walls came tumbling down, perhaps or probably it wasn't all of the walls, but just part of them. So we're going to read from Radak. So, Akiva, will you read us what Radak had to say about Joshua?
This is Joshua 6:5. The text states that the city wall will crumble in its place. But what about the house of Rahab that was located in the city wall? It is not likely that she and her family were preserved although their house was destroyed, for the text would not have passed over such a miracle in silence. Also, Joshua commanded the spies to go to the house of the harlot and save them, implying that her house was intact and did not fall. Rather, it would seem to me that the entire city wall did not collapse, but only that the section that faced the Israelite forces. There they attacked, while the Rahab's house was situated in another section of the wall that didn't fall.
Thank you. So, any thoughts about this in the context of what we spoke about last week, or just any other thoughts?
I had one thought.
Yes?
When it talks about the walls come tumbling down,
Yeah.
that may just be an indication that there was either an opening of a gate or a breach in the wall, meaning that the city was open to an invading force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank
And
you. Yeah.
and that there need not necessarily be any crumbling of the wall.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. So there might not have been any crumbling at all from your
Yeah,
indication.
but
Certainly. Mm-hmm.
if the doors open, if the main doors open, the walls effectively have crumbled down. The town is open to invasion.
Interesting. So you're saying that the wall tumbling down might have been metaphorical rather than physical.
Yes.
That's great. That's an interesting way of looking at it, and that would certainly jive with both the archaeological findings and with what Radak is saying here. So thank you for that perspective. Okay, so moving on. Last week we ended with a cliffhanger. The warriors had been specifically instructed that everything of material value was to be dedicated to the Holy One. But there was one guy who just could not resist. So let's read last week's cliffhanger. Joan, could you read this for us?
The Israelites, however, violated the prescription. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of that which was proscribed, and God was incensed with the Israelites.
Okay, so knowing how things work in the Torah, is this going to end well? What do you think?
It never does.
It never does. So, what do you think's going to happen?
He's going to tumble down.
He's going to tumble down. Okay. Okay. So, let's keep going from here. Here we've got a picture of Joshua and where Jericho and Ai are. So we're going to read Joshua 7 2 through 9. Arlene, could you read that for us?
Joshua sent some men from Jericho to Ai, which lies close to Beth Aven, east of Bethel, with orders to go up and spy out the country. So the men went up and spied out Ai. They returned to Joshua and reported to him, "Not all the troops need to go up. Let 2,000 or 3,000 men go and attack Ai. Do not trouble all the troops to go up there. For the people there are few." So about 3,000 of the troops marched up there, but they were routed by the men of Ai. The men of Ai killed about 36 of them, pursuing them outside the gate as far as Shebarim, and cutting them down along the descent. And the heart of the troops sank in utter dismay. Joshua thereupon rent his clothes. He and the elders of Israel lay until evening with their faces to the ground in front of the ark of God. And they strewed earth on their heads. "Ah, my sovereign God," cried Joshua, "why did you lead this people across the Jordan only to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to be destroyed by them? If only we had been content to remain on the other side of the Jordan. Oh, my sovereign, what can I say after Israel has turned tail before its enemies? When the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land hear of this, they will turn upon us and wipe out our very name from the earth. And what will you do about your great name?"
Thank you. Okay, so initially the spies are very overconfident, and then they are very seriously defeated, and Joshua laments. So let's just look at some of these footnotes. First of all, the area of the ruin is usually identified as an area called Et-Tel, which is just southeast of Bethel. They are few, these inhabitants. The area, which is called Shevarim, is broken places. You may recognize this word. Shevarim is one of the calls of the shofar. It's that broken notes sound. So it means broken up things. And when it says that the heart of the troops sank in utter dismay, the word here in another translation is that their hearts melted and turned to water. And actually, if we look back in the Hebrew, it says Vayehi Lamayim. They turned to water, right? They melted and turned to water. That's the part that I highlighted in blue so that you could see it. I just thought that that was really interesting, that the phrase was that their hearts turned to water. And this last highlight down here is that it says they turned tail. This is the way the translator put it in the JPS translation, but the actual word is they turned the back of their neck, which is a gesture of submission, right? Showing the back of your neck is a show of vulnerability. And the other part here is that they tore his clothes and he tossed earth, which is an Israelite mourning practice, right? This is the part where they threw earth on their heads. So I wanted to show you some things about Israelite mourning practices. The first time that we hear about the idea of tearing your clothes in the Torah is in Genesis 37:34, when Jacob is shown the coat of many colors that the brothers have dipped in some blood and have torn up. And they say, look at this, to imply, without saying it, that their brother has been killed by a wild beast. And their father assumes that that is what happens. And he tears his clothes and he puts sackcloth on and he starts mourning him. Now, this, by the way, is, remember when I said that I used AI to help me with preparing for this lesson? Well, I asked ChatGPT for references about throwing dirt on one's head, and I asked for some artwork to illustrate it. So first thing that happened was that the AI actually gave me a few of the references without my having to go through the Torah to look them up. So I got these references that I needed about all the times that it was mentioned in the Torah, in throughout the Tanakh, about putting on sackcloth and tearing your clothes and
What
putting...
actually is sackcloth?
Sackcloth, good question. Sackcloth is the cloth that a sack is made out of, which is really, really rough material. It's like a potato sack, like a potato sack, right? So it's really, really rough, awful material that you wouldn't want to have against your skin. It's like,
But it probably is not what we are used to seeing as sackcloth. It probably is just a very, very rough woven cloth
yeah, it's rough
at
woven
that
cloth.
time. You
Is
know,
this the beginning of when Catholics put hair on their
Yeah, like a hair shirt.
shirt?
Yeah, it's really just a rough piece of
Okay,
material.
thank you.
So, again, when I asked AI if it could find me a piece of artwork that showed somebody wearing sackcloth, well, actually, I asked for somebody who had put dirt on their head in mourning practice, and it drew this picture for me. And then I said, well, this is a good picture, but I need one where the clothing is torn up. And so it gave me this other picture. Now, it did not find these pictures, it drew them for me. So this is a little amazing and kind of scary. Okay. But I just wanted you to see why I said this is and AI. These are examples of how one can use AI carefully to, but I looked at it and I validated it and I said, yes, these look like what I'm looking for. So here are some other references, both from Samuel and from First Samuel and from Second Samuel, of other times when people have been known to tear their clothes and put earth on their head. The first one is when a Benjaminite messenger arrives with news of Israel's defeat and the death of Eli's sons. And the second one is when when a man brings David news of Saul and Jonathan's death. So both of these are times when someone flings themselves to the ground, covers themselves in dirt, etc.
But if they've already torn their clothes, why are they putting sackcloth on? They putting it over the clothes?
No, well, it depends. Sometimes they put on sackcloth. So Jacob put on sackcloth, and one of these references is from Second Samuel. They're both from Second Samuel. Yes, and in these later references, they're not putting on sackcloth. They're just ripping their clothes. So it depends, but all of these things are either torn clothes or wearing sackcloth.
Do we know about the earth on the head?
It's part of the mourning practice. It's just you put dirt on your head basically to say I'm dirt. I'm low. These are ancient mourning practices. I guess so the tearing of clothes is something that we do today when we
with
hear of a
ribbon.
death, but thank goodness that we do not have to put dirt on our heads.
Or we put the ribbon that's
Yes.
cut
So
ribbon.
so in you will find in traditionally observant families, they actually do tear a piece of clothing rather than a ribbon, and they will often wear that piece of clothing for the full week rather than taking a ribbon and transferring it from the piece of clothing that they're wearing from one piece of clothing to another. And sometimes it's really an expression of grief, and they'll do it immediately upon hearing of the death of a loved one. But it varies. Some people will do that, and some people will wait until they're at the cemetery.
Many Orthodox, on hearing of a death, take their hand and put it up on their opposite shoulder and rip the sleeve out of the garment.
Yep. Yes.
Unless you're Lady Gaga and then you rip some meat.
Yes, that may be true. Okay, so before we move on, is there anything else you notice about the text that we read right here at the end? This part that says, "What will you do about your great name?" Does that remind you of anything that Moses used to do?
Arguing with God?
Arguing with God, yes, but very specifically, Moses used to say things like, "How's that going to make you look in front of all the other people?
Oh,
If you take us out into the desert and you let us die, or not you let us die, if you kill us and start all over again," because there were a couple of times when God said, "I am going to smite all the people and start over and make you a great nation." And Moses said, "If you do that, aren't all of the other people going to say God couldn't keep the Israelites alive in the desert? Or God didn't keep God's promise?" So here again, Joshua is learning from what Moses did. What are you going to do about your great name? It's basically flattering or preemptively embarrassing God and really trying to make God worry about God's reputation.
Yeah, what will the neighbors think?
What will the neighbors think? It would be a shanda from the goyim. Exactly. That is exactly what Joshua is saying. Okay, let's move on. So, Joshua doesn't know why it is that God has turned away and allowed the defeat. But we do. We have seen the scene in the movie that Joshua hasn't, right? We know what happened. So, the Holy One is going to explain. So, Robin, can you read Joshua 7:10 to 11?
But God answered Joshua, "Arise, why do you lie prostrate? Israel has sinned. They have broken the covenant by which I bound them. They have taken of the prescribed and put it in their vessels. They have stolen. They have broken faith."
Thank you. So, here God has revealed the sin. I have another translation here, the one done by Everett Fox, which, Akiva, can I ask you to read the Everett Fox translation?
Oh,
Yes.
Israel has sinned. Yes, they have crossed my covenant that I commanded them. Yes, they have taken from the devoted things. Yes, they have stolen. Yes, they have lied. And yes, they have put it among their vessels.
Note the repetition. Fox has translated it as yes. The word in Hebrew is actually vigam. If you look back at the Hebrew where I've highlighted it in blue, it says vigam this, vigam that, vigam another thing. which really means and also, but he's chosen to use the word yes, which works well. He could have said they've done this and also they've done that and also they've done this and also, but I think that the translation that he's used is much more effective than just this list that's in the JPS translation. Then we hear how the person who has done this needs to be found out and punished. So, Joan, can you read us Joshua 7:12 through 15?
Therefore, the Israelites will not be able to hold their ground against their enemies. They will have to turn tail before their enemies, for they have become proscribed. I will not be with you any more unless you root out from among you what is proscribed. Go and purify the people. Order them. Purify yourselves for tomorrow. For thus says the Eternal, the God of Israel, something prescribed is in your midst, O Israel, and you will not be able to stand up to your enemies until you have purged the prescribed from among you. Tomorrow morning you shall present yourself by tribes. Whichever tribe God indicates shall come forward by clans. The clan that God indicates shall come forward by ancestral house, and the ancestral house that God indicates shall come forward man by man. Then he who is indicated for proscription and all that is his shall be put to the fire, because he broke the covenant of God and because he committed an outrage in Israel.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a really interesting thing that is about to happen. And Michael Hatton wrote in his book, Joshua, the Challenge of the Promised Land, that we've heard from before. The passage above describes the remarkable process by which the perpetrator was to be exposed. Although the text is silent concerning the precise mechanism, it's clear that the process involved some sort of consecutive sorting of elements from the larger to the smaller and finally to the single individual. The traditional sources suggest that it was the Ark of the Covenant or perhaps the breastplate of the high priest containing the 12 tribal gems that served as the polygraph. For instance, as the 12 tribal representatives filed past the ark, the tribal prince of Judah was ensnared so that he was paralyzed to escape its embrace, indicating that a member of his tribe was responsible. The clan heads of that tribe then appeared before the ark, and one of them became entrapped by the force field. This winnowing process continued until the actual guilty individual was singled out. Alternatively, the tribal leaders may have presented themselves before the high priest, and according to this tradition, the gem of the tribe of Judah darkened, indicating that it was a member of Judah who was responsible. The clan heads of that tribe then appeared before the high priest and drew lots, and the lot of the guilty clan was chosen, and so on. While it's not possible to ascertain the exact nature of the selection method, whether it depended on the Ark of the Covenant or the breastplate of the high priest, the fundamental implication is the same. It is as if God actively singled out the perpetrator. Both the ark and the breastplate are regarded as barometers of God's presence and involvement in the world and in the life of the people of Israel. So now we're going to read about the confession. So, Arlene, could you read about the confession in Joshua 7:19 to 22?
Then Joshua said to Achan, my son, pay honor to the Eternal, the God of Israel, by making confession. Tell me what you have done. Do not hold anything back from me. Achan answered Joshua, it is true. I have sinned against the Eternal, the God of Israel. This is what I did. I saw among the spoil a fine shinar mantle, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. And I coveted them and took them. They are buried in the ground in my tent with the silver under the mantle. Joshua sent messengers who hurried to the tent, and there was the mantle buried in his tent with the silver underneath.
Thank you. So first of all, shinar is actually a word for Babylonia, and a mantle is a piece of clothing. And just one note about the word covet. So covet does not mean wanting something like what somebody else has. I can't, it is not a sin to say, I want sneakers like the sneakers that Bob has. Because it's okay to say, I want sneakers like Bob's sneakers. It is not okay to say, I want Bob's sneakers and I am going to try to get them from Bob so that Bob does not have them anymore and I have them instead of Bob. So coveting Bob's wife or coveting Bob's house or Bob's beast or whatever, that means by implication, I want that instead of Bob. And this is an example of I coveted them and I took them. Not I wish I had them, but I wish I had them instead of somebody else having them. And in this case, it's the worst kind of coveting. God is supposed to have these, and I am going to take them instead of God. Okay, so moving on from there, here is the aftermath of his confession. Robin, can you read this next portion?
Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, son of Zerah, and the silver, the mantle, and the wedge of gold, his sons and daughters, and his ox, his donkey, and his flock, and his tent, and all his belongings, and brought them up to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, what calamity you have brought upon us. God will bring calamity upon you this day. And all Israel pelted him with stones. They put him to the fire and stoned them. They raised a huge mound of stories over him, which is still there. Then God's anger subsided. That is why the place was named the Valley of Achor, as is still the case.
Thank you. So, Achan, which the name Achan means troubler, he and all of his stuff, including his daughters and sons who belonged to him, because that's the way things were considered in ancient times, all get the same punishment that he gets. And the valley of Achor means calamity or disaster. And we can see from this map where the valley of Achor is. It's north of Jericho and to the west a little bit of Gilgal, which we looked at before. It's this valley here just to the east of the mountains. It's just to the northern boundary of what will eventually become Judah when the area is divided up among the tribes. So, any thoughts about what happens here? Yes.
Yeah, question. All of his possessions and his issue are stoned and burned,
Yep.
but not his wife.
Well, we
There's
don't
no
hear
men-
anything. There's no mention
There's
of his
no
wife.
mention of his wife,
Right.
which might indicate to us that she goes back to her family because she is not of his issue. She is not of his possession. She does not belong to him in that sense. He does not own her.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. She's not mentioned. So one possibility is that she is no longer with us, and yours is another way of looking at it. I had not thought of it that way. I assumed she was non-existent because she wasn't mentioned. But you know, women in ancient texts are often not mentioned one way or the other. I think I like your answer a lot, but it could be either way.
I don't
Any,
see why the animals have to be killed. It just seems
I
All of,
agree with you.
all of his issue, all of his possessions.
All of his
The
possessions.
wife is not a possession, but
No.
everything else, including his children, which he has the right to kill. In other words,
Yeah.
while they're his children, he has complete control of them.
Well, back to
The one
the
thing he
animals.
doesn't have is control of his wife.
So thank you. The animals, Joan, I think it's the same question here as it was as to why they were destroyed in the first place. These animals that belong to him, I guess by extension, become part of the booty that was doomed or was put as harem, as dedicated to God. Why it is, I don't have a good explanation for you. It reminds me of the end of the book of Jonah, the last line of the book of Jonah, which we sometimes make fun of. What are
so
those
much
last
cattle.
words? And
So
also
much
cattle, and also much cattle, right? Where the last line is why should it has to do with Jonah being upset about a plant, and God saying, if you're upset about a plant, why should I not worry about this whole city filled with people and also much cattle? Right? So you are right to be concerned about the animals. Everyone else who spoke about it last week are right to be concerned about the animals. And this is one of the questions that when you make it to your conversation with God after you 25, 35, 40 years from now, at 120, when you pass quietly in your sleep and blissfully, when you have your conversation with Hashem, you ask about the animals, okay? I don't know the answer for that, but thank you for raising it. It's a really good
Can't
question.
you ask G-Chat or whoever it is now?
I will ask and see what answer I get. I will ask and let you know. So here we are. We had I and we had AI, but now we're going to have our second I. So, Akiva, will you read for us Joshua 8, 1 through 8, and we're going back to Everett Fox's translation. I think it starts at the very bottom of that page and then continues. Thank you.
Yud-Heh Vav-Heh said to Yeshua, do not be frightened, do not be dismayed. Take all the people of battle with you, and arise and go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You are to do to Ai and to its king as you did to Jericho and to its king. Only its spoils and its animals may you plunder for yourself. Set yourself an ambush for the city behind it. So Yeshua arose along with the people of battle to go up against Ai. And Yeshua chose 30,000 men, mighty men of valor, and sent them off at night. He charged them, saying, see, you are setting an ambush for the city, behind the city. Do not go exceedingly far from the city, but all of you, be ready. As for me and all the fighting people who are with me, we will come near to the city, and it shall be when they come out to meet us at the beginning, we will flee before them. But when they come out after us, until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will think they are fleeing before us at the beginning, and we flee before them. Then you are to arise from the ambush and take possession of the city. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, will give it into your hand, and it will be when you seize the city that you are to ignite the city with fire. In accordance with the word of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, you are to do exactly as we are doing in Gaza. Oh, I'm sorry. See, I have charged you.
Thank you for your commentary there. Okay, so what is different this time than the first time?
More men.
Okay, more men. Yes. What else?
Battle
He
plan.
uses subterfuge
Yes, he
to,
uses
to get the
subterfuge.
soldiers out of the city, which they would be able to defend, get them
Mm-hmm.
away from the city, chasing a small group,
Mm-hmm.
and then you enter the city where there are no more soldiers, and you take possession and start to burn the city.
Right. So he has a very clever strategy. What else is different? What about the animals?
They saved the animals this
They
time.
save the animals, and what else do they save? Or what else do they do different? What are they going to do with the animals and the other stuff?
They probably divide it up among themselves.
Right. It's not proscribed. It doesn't go to Hashem. It goes to the warriors.
You may plunder it.
You may plunder it. So, does the idea that a battle that is supported by God and a battle that isn't supported by God remind you of anything in the Torah? It reminded me of something, although the sequence of events is a little bit different. So I don't know if it's going to come to mind for you. If it does, great. If not, I'm going to move on and show you. Does it immediately make you think of something?
Yeah,
Yeah?
makes me think of the first king of Israel, who
No, I'm thinking going backwards, not going forwards. So you're going ahead. I'm saying in the first 5 books. I'm going to go backward and tell you what it reminded me of, okay? In the book of Numbers, there is something that we sometimes call the unauthorized battle. It's when the scouts have come back from looking at Canaan and they say, "Ugh, we can't possibly do this. We look like grasshoppers in our eyes." And the Holy One has just decreed that they are all going to have to die in the wilderness. And then they say, "Oh, whoa, wait a minute. We were wrong. We can defeat anyone." So here's what they say. They say, when Moses repeated these words to all the Israelites, the people were overcome with grief. The next morning, the fighting force set out toward the crest of the hill country, saying, "We are prepared to go up to the place that Hashem spoke of, because we were wrong." But Moses said, "Why do you transgress Hashem's command? This will not succeed. Do not go up, lest you be routed by your enemies, for Hashem is not in your midst. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites will be there to face you, and you will fall by the sword, inasmuch as you have turned from following Hashem, and Hashem will not be with you." Yet defiantly they marched toward the crest of the hill country, though neither Hashem's Ark of the Covenant nor Moses stirred from the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelled in the hill country came down and dealt them a shattering blow at Hormah. So they ignored Moses, they proceeded into battle, and they were routed. And this demonstrated that victory in battle depended on God's support, and acting against God's will would lead to disaster. So now here we are, and the Holy One has made it clear that once again, without God on our side, we will be defeated, but with the promise of divine support, we will prevail. So let's see what is going to happen. We've got overwhelming force and we have strategy. So where are we up to? Joan.
Then all the fighting people who were in the city were summoned to pursue after them, and they pursued after Yehoshua and let him themselves be torn away from the city, so that not a man remained in Ai or in Bethel who had not gone out after Israel. They left the city open, and they pursued after Israel. And then Yud-Heh Vav-Heh said to Yeshua, "Stretch out the scimitar that is in your hand towards Ai, for into your hand I give it." So Yehoshua stretched out the scimitar that was in his hand towards the city, and the ambush quickly arose from its place and ran at the stretching out of his hand, and they came to the city and captured it, and quickly ignited the city with fire. The men of Ai faced about behind them and saw now that the smoke of the city went up to the heavens, but they had no place at hand to flee to here or to there. And the fighting people who had fled to the wilderness turned back upon the pursuers. Now Yehoshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and that the smoke of the city was going up. So they returned and struck down the men of Ai. They went out of the city to meet them, and they were regarding Israel in the middle. These were on this side, and those were on that side, and they struck them down until they left them no survivor or fugitive.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Wow. So, what was the Holy One's role in this victory? What did God do?
Well, he told him what to do.
Yes,
He was the general,
right. Well, the strategist.
the strategist, and he told Joshua to raise the scimitar, which was
Yes,
like
right.
Moses with the rod during the battle.
Yes. So the signal at the precise moment, it made it look like Joshua was the one who made the strategic decision, but Joshua really couldn't necessarily see when the right moment was. Joshua couldn't see exactly what was going on way over there. So it was God who said, "This is the moment when you should raise the scimitar." It made it feel to the troops that it was Joshua whose hand was responsible for it. But we all know, and Joshua knew, that it was God who told him when to raise his hand. So it moved some of the responsibility from being entirely God-centered to starting to be people-centered. God is moving from being the force to being the inspiration. And then the other thing that, as we mentioned before, is that this time all of the booty, all of the things that they found, that they got, it doesn't belong to God this time. It belongs to the troops who deserved it because they were the ones who fought. And who knows, maybe they might have rebelled if they didn't get it. So again, it's moving towards not only human responsibility, but human reward. So it's a big change in the way the battle all goes. Let's just read that last bit here, 27-28. Arlene, can you read that?
Only the animals and the spoils of that city did Israel plunder for themselves, in accordance with the word of Yahweh, which he had commanded Yehoshua. And Yehoshua burned down Ai, He made it into everlasting mound, a wasteland until this day.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to close out the chapter by reading 30 through 35, which, Akiva, can I ask you to read
Sure.
the following instructions?
At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Eternal, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of God, had commanded the Israelites, and as it is written in the book of the teaching of Moses, an altar of unhewn stone upon which no iron had been wielded. They offered on it burnt offerings to God, and brought sacrifices of well-being. And there, on the stones, he inscribed a copy of the teaching that Moses had written for the Israelites. All Israel, stranger and citizen alike, with their elders, officials, and magistrates, stood on either side of the ark, facing the Levitical priests who carried the ark of God's covenant. Half of them faced Mount Gerizim, and half of them faced Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of God, had commanded them of old, in order to bless the people of Israel. And after that he read all the words of the teaching, the blessing and the curse, just as it is written in the book of the teaching. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua failed to read in the presence of the whole congregation of Israel, including the women and children and the strangers who had accompanied them.
Thank you. So Joshua leads the ceremony that he was instructed about in Deuteronomy, reading the blessings and the curses and reminding the people about all the laws that they and that we have committed to upholding. These include taking care of the poor and the stranger within our midst. And it's being read out to stranger and citizen alike. These words, which I highlighted in the English and also in the Hebrew, are kager ka'ezrach. And I'm also always struck by that. In the context of just having struck down an entire town of strangers, the distinction between the strangers who are with us and the strangers who are against us is really a very stark one. Still, Michael Hatton, who we've heard from before, points out that the king whose death I chose to skip over reading is dispatched without recourse to torture, and his body is shortly thereafter removed from the gallows and buried without mutilation. And these represent two telling departures from the conventions of ancient warfare, the idea that he wasn't tortured before death and he wasn't mutilated, which are both things that we hear about in modern times right now and horrify us. So the context in which we're placing all of this needs to be perhaps separated from our modern sensibilities, and perhaps it echoes some of our modern sensibilities. We need to keep our eyes open, but I don't think that we can really fully judge the actions of people 3,500 years ago by the standards of modern times. That said, I think we need to expect modern behavior to be held at the very least to those expectations. And next week, I'm expecting that we're going to, as we dive into more military campaigns, we're going to look more at the ethics of war. And I have some very interesting sources that I'm going to share with us, including the writings of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, Rav Cook, and Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, and some writings from the IDF handbook about the ethics of war. So I expect that that's going to be a very meaningful and interesting discussion. We're almost at 8 o'clock, and we'll dive into some more about the ethics of war as we continue talking about some more military campaigns and a few other things next week.